Dr. Jazz.
But cool, Ohad, thanks for taking the time that we finally found it. We were
Thanks for having me.
catching us kind of in Europe and and then now, okay. But you know, I've talked to so many guys that basically, I think with almost everyone you play with regularly, you know, from Newsbound to Swallow to Dan Weiss to Miles to Russ Johnson the other day, and you know, everyone I talk to, and we kind of stumble upon you. We talk about your composition, and that's where I want to start, because it's like you know, every record I get from you or listen to, it's just like, man, where do you get the ideas from? And especially the rhythmical part. And you know, I listened to the last one, Mise and Place, Mise en Place on Intact with Dan and Miles, and it's just, you know, starts off with this Kamali thing again rhythmically, and the other one I listened to today, Leia's lines, you know, it's just like this raga almost sounds like. But anyway, how do you get the ideas? How do you do a composition? I know it's like really a lot is through composed, and then kind of it goes into improv when I don't even know what it's improv or is it composed sometimes. Like, what's your process there? Long question.
I'm happy to hear that, because that's kind of the name of the game. That's definitely something I been wanting to investigate and expound on it from kind of the get-go of my stumbling into composition, which was this, you know, blurring the line basically between the writing and the improvised, right? I mean, there's a long history of that, you know, doing that,
Sure.
starting from the 30s, I guess, you know, but even before. But in this case, the repertoire you're alluding to is very much anchored in the Hindustani tradition, right? And that's something that I've been studying and playing regularly for 20 plus years now, on the bansuri.
Yeah.
And beyond that, just studying that music and taking an interest in some of the other instruments repertoire, like the tabla for the most part, having also been a close friend and collaborator with Dan, who's, you know,
Sure.
my son's godfather, lives one door down, and all that. So I had kind of a privileged access to it, and it's basically the confluences of all these worlds that kind of come together, and me trying to project something where you're trying to position yourself as an improviser. What do? You know, what kind of material can you take? What kind of underlying structures can you use? And then I guess the thing that brings it together are the people that play it. So obviously
Sure.
Miles and are, you know, Miles is a great conjure player. Dan is a great multi-instrumentalist, you know, as fluent on tabla and drums. So that vocabulary is very anchored with them, and that's kind of what makes it happen. And then the compositions, a lot of the vocabulary comes from my other side, you know, the whole, you know, I was raised as a classical pianist. Classical and contemporary music is very much part of my thing, and so a lot of the things come with that mise en place. That last record, a lot of the vocabulary and a lot of the some ideas come from Per Norgard, your my Danish composer, still alive, and Norgard has some kind of melodic and rhythmic idea that's very, very thorough, and it's too much for what we do. You know, you need a couple lifetimes to embed that into our world, so you could make that personal and all that. But in a nutshell, that's what's coming, you know, from it comes from these different universes.
How do you start? I mean, you know, I listened to long forms today, That's why I'm like with last lines. For me, it's just like it's stuck. I was cooking today and I put that on. I was like, man, I stopped. Like, what's happening again? You know, I listened to the record already many times, but like, how do you start a tune like that? I mean, like, what's the process usually?
Well, Laya's line is particular because it's really taken after the piano concerto that I wrote for
Yeah,
Jason and Laya's. And the third section of that concerto, it's a 3-movement concerto, and the third movement is essentially based on the 16-beat cycle on one rag. That is
yeah.
right. It's one of the rags, and it's a blues. So I knew I wanted something that we could mess with, being a blues, but with the meters being all fuzzy and not, not making it, 1-4-5 blues. Yet it is a 1-4-5 blues. So essentially, what happens is that it's a 16-beat cycle imposed over a 12 measures cycle, which is the
Yeah.
blues. So it's 3 times 16, and inside of it, I just have fun.
Mm.
By grouping it by quarter notes, dotted quarters, 5/4, and kind of blur the line there. The solos are pretty straightforward. It's just a regular blues, except because the harmonic rhythm moves twice as fast, and the quarter note feels different. It gives that feeling. But that's where it came from. It came from that, and I think that was the original idea came from. That's because I was sitting on the piano and I was trying to imagine that sound. It came clearly from a Ligeti. Some of these echoey things that he uses in the Warsaw, the third or fourth etude, I forget. I really like that. And then I just had to stick to a rag, so it's to a mode, as a 7 notes mode. This rag is interesting because it has both major and minor third.
Okay. Yeah.
So it has major, minor third, fourth, fifth, flat 7. So you could really mess with that.
Okay. That's quite cool. Yeah, it's just like, I mean, in general, all your tunes, it's like I said, it's this, and it really doesn't help that Dan is playing the drums. I'm kidding, but because it's just like, what's happening? You're like, damn, he plays over and of course catches everything what's meant to be. But when you have Miles and Dan in your groups, like, obviously, do you write for them or do you basically write let's say when you did this trio album, like, do you know that those two cats are in the band, or do you just write a trio composition basically? Or
it's specifically written for them. These guys are joined at the hip. They love each other. They have a label together.
They're duo, and
now. I mean, we all came together in studying wise. We all studied at the Manhattan School of Music in the mid '90s, and that's where we started playing together. And then I was very tight to Dan, and then then after Miles's life came together in a certain way, he and Dan came together, and they function the same. They're very similar in the way they work and they think about music. They're extraordinarily disciplined. They will see a project through, as I would not necessarily do that in that same way. So writing for them is really the idea.
Do you guys talk a lot about music when you give them a lead sheet, or
say that again?
Do you guys discuss a lot about the music when you give them the lead sheets, or I mean, do they just immediately get their own ideas also and do it?
It depends how good the tune is. If the tune is good, it doesn't need a lot of explanation, but unfortunately I'm not there yet. And sometimes, like, they all ask different things. They're very, very experienced and they can see through. They've had so many, their knowledge is, in terms of understanding what the music is so thorough that they can see through things. Typically Miles will ask me, okay, I can see there is a pattern here. I want to understand the pattern so I can let go of the pattern. That would be Miles's thing. And then Miles is, is obviously thinking about the technique of the guitar. And Dan is the same thing. He starts to understand where the patterns are.
Yeah.
A lot of the repertoire is linked to tabla, so he's familiar with this. But for the most part, I don't have to say anything. It's and you don't want to say too much to these people.
Oh, sure, of course, yeah.
So
yeah. With musicians at this level, yeah, you just give them, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, years ago, I remember I did my first tour with Taishan, like in 2003, and I wrote like music that was like 8 pages, constant changing meters, and I didn't say a word, and it was just like first gig, like, oh wow, okay, damn, man.
You committed to memory too after the first gig.
Oh man, we had like 14 tunes, and on the second gig he didn't need lead sheets. I was like, Ty, are you serious? Are you? Yeah, sure, don't worry. Damn, okay. that was scary.
He's a different breed, man.
Yeah. I mean, all these guys, like, they play together, obviously, and yeah. But Ohad, I wanted to ask you, you mentioned classical piano before, and I don't know, I think you might have an interesting story there. Like, you ended in New York, but born in Switzerland, and spent a lot of time in Europe, and like, how did you get excited initially for jazz, also in improvisation? Where was that and when was that actually? I mean, mid-80s, I guess, or?
Yeah. Well, actually, I was born in France. I wasn't born in Switzerland.
France. Sorry.
It's more like I popped out in France. My dad was studying the physics, and he, so I was born in France almost accidentally. But my parents are, Israeli immigrants. So after I was born, they went back there. And I spent a few of my baby years over there until they eventually settled in Geneva. And that's kind of where my formative years were spent until the age of 16. And at the age of 16, I moved to Florida I went to high school over there.
Oh, okay. Well,
high school over there. So I had this kind of dual thing. And I came back after that in the late 90s. I was 19 when I came back, and started university, kind of parental pressure. They weren't really interested in me doing music. So I did philosophy and musicology. But then it quickly veered back to music. Essentially, I was a classical pianist. My parents were very supportive of, having that cultural background that you must know an instrument. I wasn't very good enough, but wasn't really meant to play that thing. When I was 15, I started dating the daughter of this famous Argentinian pianist called Martha Argerich, and then I was surrounded by the pantheon of classical musicians, and so I saw Friedrich Goldach, Chick Corea, Daniel Barenbaum, and hanging out that big house of theirs. And, it was clear that this is not my calling, but exactly at the same time, I was around 15, I saw a Sonny Rollins concert on TV, and I was mesmerized, and just fell into the rabbit hole, and that was it. I basically got hooked off that experience, and so I tried to self-teach myself, and a number of things happened until I moved to Florida for a few years, and there I fell into the American music system, so it's the mid-80s. And there you have band, you have jazz band, and also South Florida, which is where I was, is a refuge for retirees, and there was a number of people from the big band era that were there.
Okay, wow.
So when I was 18, it was a change of semester. I changed from being the pianist in the big band. I said, well, I'm going to try the saxophone. And the family I was staying with, they had an old beat up alto, and that was also love at first sight.
Wow. Okay.
Once into it, I changed to tenor, but I quickly got into it, and I found my first Monk album, and by then I was completely into this thing, And I came back to Europe and I finished a conservatory, so I could have a diploma, and I tried to find venues and things to expound, on the things that I had experienced in the U.S. Wasn't that easy. There's one place in Geneva, you might have played there, I'm not sure.
AMR probably, right?
AMR.
Yeah, sure, yeah.
And so that's a wonderful place, It's a center for what we do. There's not a whole lot of these things left that have that breadth of vision, and welcoming like we both would do. And so that was my breeding ground. Also, when I came back from New York, I got hooked up with Konitz, who was a guest in a big band, and I was like, I'm sticking with this guy. And
how did it happen? I mean,
the leader of the big band was a very nice, straightforward big band writer that loved Manny album and Shelly Man and all the West Coast jazz. So he wrote music like that, and he invited Lee. He had some kind of big opportunity that was presenting itself, and then he needed somebody. He couldn't speak English, and I did, and I was hanging out with this guy because I was trying to just glue myself to anybody that could give me information. Sure. And I was there, and then Lee heard me play, and then he was cool, and we kept in touch. I helped him to come back to the AMR because I was already dealing with the AMR then. I started going to New York twice a year, and the relationship grew from that. I wrote this big. This is where my interest for composition came in the years after I came back from Florida. And I was basically self-taught. And I wrote this kind of long chamber piece for 12 musicians with some, drummer Mike Serene, the great
Sure, I love him, yeah.
So Mike was the drummer. This bass player who stopped playing now, called John Silverman, was an US expat in Paris, and a bunch of good European musicians, string quartet and all that. And so I got Lee in that thing, and he toured Europe.
Okay.
And just speaks a lot to how open Konitz was, because there I was 23, 24. I wrote this thing, and it worked, I guess. But he didn't ask any question. He just trooped along. We traveled in this minibus. He loved hanging out with the guys. And then, I just put him in front of the stage, and the music was complicated. There's shit happening left and right, and he was in there,
Wow.
So yeah, that was that. And then when I moved here, I went to Manhattan School of Music to study composition. Actually, that's where I met Dan and Miles and everyone.
All these guys, yeah.
But the baggage, if you're referring to the piano thing, that's very handy.
Sure, that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good companion for the composing, and it certainly helped with the improvisation, and it helps me articulate a lot of the ideas that I have, because I can, to some extent, play some of these.
Yeah, that makes complete sense then. Yeah, that you can do that on the piano, get a wider picture of harmonization and everything. The lines. Wow, beautiful. But I wanted to ask you about Lee. You probably talked about him many times already, but how did your relationship develop through the years? From this, you being in your early 20s, I guess, to really strong musical partners in a way. I mean, you guys made 8 or 9 albums, right, or something like that. And how did that go through time? And
yeah, it's a particular relationship, really, because it morphed into something deeply personal. He became a father figure, and then, like every relationship that you have, your parents, it becomes difficult, and then you go through the other side, you go through the tunnel, and we ended up being very close, really, till the end. But in the beginning, it was his instinct trying to doing what he was doing with everyone else, which is opening himself up to new experiences and trying to see if it would further his own music.
Yeah.
And I was very hungry. I had this intuition that, I needed a mentor. I needed somebody, and I didn't really have a mentor, and I was looking for that. So I initiated a lot of what was going on in the beginning until I moved to New York, and then he gave me his first break with that first record, which we did based on the French Impressionist repertoire. It's just him, string quartet. And then things kind of caught on, and there was an agent involved, and then people started calling, and this thing came and that thing came, and But underneath it all was this understanding, which is I will dedicate myself to bring to life your side as a composer,
Mm.
and we'll improvise over it, and then I'll frame it in however many situations there are. It was more complicated, to be honest, when it came to the saxophone, because as much as I am deeply influenced by him and in his approach, I would say that I was not instinctively started there. I'm the guy that I would be the closest to would be more like Wayne.
Yeah.
And I love Train, and I love Sonny Rollins, and Lee hated Train. He turned it off,
Oh shit, really?
He said, and I asked him, he says the sound turned him off. He didn't like that.
Really? Wow. Okay.
So he also played some kind of weird things on my psyche, because he kind of castrated me, and so that's one of the things that happened when we kind of went into a tension zone. I needed to get out of that, because like what I'm doing now, which is, I'm not playing with Dan and Miles. I've moved on to these different things. I'm finally reconnecting to this original thing that I've been doing. So the connection was really, on one hand, the writing and bringing him and validating him as a composer and as a soloist within that thing. Yeah. And to a lesser extent, me being a participant on the saxophone, but I don't think he really valued my playing a whole lot,
Interesting. Wow.
Which is, was difficult for many years, and until the end. At the end, he was very kind and recognized things, but it wasn't easy for many years,
Wow.
So it was a complex relationship.
Yeah, I can imagine.
At the end, I'm the one that the last concerts, the last writing, the last moments were spent together. I'm in charge of his estate, partly with other people. All of his instruments are downstairs.
Oh, really? Wow.
His mouthpieces, his saxophones, his piano that is there. I have this jazz club in the front called Seeds.
Oh, really? I didn't know that. That's you're behind that. Okay, I know the place. I didn't know.
Front of the loft. It's a loft here. The front of the loft is Seeds.
Oh wow, that's so cool, man. Okay, I didn't know that. Really? Okay.
Yeah.
I know the place, but yeah. Wow.
So there. It's a little complicated to summarize, but that gives you an idea, of kind of the complex and rich.
I can imagine. Yeah, sure. Yeah. When you moved to New York, like mid-90s, was it heavy, or I mean, obviously, but who were the first connections? What was the first impression? I mean, you visited New York before, you said, but did you already have some connections musical with people here, or
Yeah, that was very lucky. Well, I had Lee, but Lee was 3 generations above, and he was playing with jazz, the pantheon of jazz history. The people that I connected with in Europe were the crowd from the Knitting Factory, mostly Dave Douglas, who helped me.
Okay.
Serene, Chris Speed, Jim Black, Brad Shepik. Who else? I'm missing a few names now. I don't remember, but there's a couple of Swiss guys that were there. There's this great trombonist that now lives in Hamburg called Christoph Schweitzer.
Oh, sure, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Christoph.
He's amazing. Yeah, I love his compositions, man.
Certainly
He's
amazing.
Beautiful,
He's a great friend, a great composer and player. So Christoph he made the move just a year before me, I think, or 6 months before me. He was playing with he did this thing with Seamus, so I met Seamus. Then my first session with Christoph was with Ethan Iverson, blah blah blah. So it's been like that. But I did have an in, as you said, which is very important.
Yeah,
and it's actually why there's many reasons why, but for sure one of the the reason I get involved with doing a performance space here is to foster that side of community, to give a landing spot for people out of town. I have a lot of European, non-American coming perform here, and it's a good place now. It's got a long track record. That's
fantastic. Huh?
So Yeah, but essentially I was introduced by all these people, and my first couple records were with the Knitting Factory, so it kind of naturally went there, you know.
Yeah. Like, was the other quartet like, you know, I spoke with Russ the other day. Like, was that like an
I didn't
important?
know you spoke with Russ. Okay.
Yeah, with like last week. Like, so that's why you know, that seemed like quite an important unit for probably for you as well. I mean, Russ said for him it was also like really important first stepping into this kind of co-led thing. But like, was that an important step for you as well? Like, I mean, in your leading development, or how should I put it?
Absolutely. It was critical. I mean, on many standpoint, you know, it's I function very the way I function is not necessarily, you know, I don't come from the space. I didn't come to this music from the place of learning it and getting skills that were honed through the regular channels
Yeah,
that most people have. You know, I kind of was a hodgepodge of influences, and I a little bit of this classical thing, and then meeting this guy, and then this experience, and then all of that not really being mentored and trying to figure my things out. And so the human component, the human the human component
yeah,
is very important. And Russ to this day is one of my close friends and somebody that was very important then, just to bring it all together.
yeah.
um, and um, and so yeah, we kept that project alive. We played a few years ago before the pandemic, just as
Oh
a,
wow, really? I
you
love that
know,
band, man. I love that
yeah,
band.
it's super fun. It's super fun, and now it sounds completely different because we're older. You know, we've more experienced. Actually, we talked about bringing it back together and writing more music for it, but it was fundamental. You know, it was something that was what's the word I'm looking for? Foundational.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, did you find it easy to lead bands? I mean, even later to become a band leader, like, or even now, like, I mean, what?
Some people struggle with that. It's never been a problem. I'm more built like that.
Okay,
My you know, my personality is certainly more geared toward being a leader than a
yeah,
sideman. Um, and I'm learning, interestingly, now to be a sideman. I'm learning to be at the service, you know, of things, as I'm getting more and more calls now for some interesting shift of. So and it's definitely calling for a set of skills that I don't really didn't really have. Also, I wasn't also, I think, skilled for the demands that were asked at the time. So leading is much more natural. Also, in most situations, I just love to write, so I just bring my own music.
sure,
You know,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. But speaking of the elders, I wanted to ask you. You know, you played with Lee, but how did this story with Steve and Adam Nussbaum begin? You know, I love that trio that you guys have. You know, it's such a beautiful, and of course, you play now in Lead Belly. If that's still active, I don't know, but I think you were in
Yes, we're
Europe
playing again next month.
Oh, really? Ah, that's like, how did this begin? This Adam and Steve connection? Was it through Lee also, or?
No, so it's really the first guy I met was Swallow in '94. I was hired by this trumpet player from Switzerland called Carlos Baumann, who was a good guy, kind of moved on a little bit. He's got into more into like teaching and alternative ways of teaching and all that. But Carlos had a moment where he's very, very dynamic, and he hired Serene,
Wow.
Swallow, and myself
Wow.
for. He was given a 2 days at the AMR and a lot of money, so he flew people in. I mean, I was still in Geneva, and after that we did a European tour.
Wow.
And actually, when I moved to the US in '95, I kept in touch with Swallow throughout. And he's the one that offered me. He knew that because he's such a great human being. He
Yeah,
knew
he's amazing. Yeah.
the journey of somebody that just got to the country, that is hungry but needs opportunities, and he's the one who offered to do that thing which is this Soldier's Tale project, l'histoire du clochard.
Yeah, yeah.
And that was done in parallel to the Konitz thing starting too. So so that's how it started. And then I think in the early 2000s, in early 2000s, I forget which year, I was hired to play in a big band in Switzerland, and the drummer was Nussbaum, and Adam had heard from me, and obviously everybody knew Adam, and then Adam and Steve are very tight, and one thing led to another. I forget how it started, but Adam called a session at his place. And then we played uptown a couple gigs, like not far from where Adam moved now, but he and Steve used to live upstate.
Yeah.
And then that was that. And then one thing came after another, and then we toured Europe a bunch, did all these records, and yeah.
Yeah, those guys must be super fun on the road, right? Must have been fun, right, in Europe?
It's very fun. It's always an experience touring with Adam, because he's a lot of people in one person.
Yeah, he's amazing.
And Steve is just the incredible guy. He's a beautiful, gentle, considerate, empathetic, listening, and yeah, and the two of them together is like it's like a like a clown couple. It's like they're a good complement of each other.
Yeah, that's good for the road sometimes, for long travels, and I can imagine.
Yeah, a lot of fun stories.
Yeah, like you mentioned before, I caught in between the lines, you're doing something else, like, not with Dan and Miles. What were you talking about? Like, what's the new compositional challenge or project you're writing now or preparing or?
Well, it's actually non-composition.
Oh, wow, okay.
I've kind of shelved the project with Miles and Dan just for a number of reasons. It was time to do that. Many years ago, I did a tour in Europe with Eric McPherson, and I've been wanting to explore something where I'm not tied up with so much writing, where I can just play. And the trigger was after Lee passed, we went through his apartment with George Schuller, who's a good friend, who played on the last Nonette, for which I wrote the music with Lee. And we found 3 DAT tapes of a session that was a rehearsal at Ornette Coleman's loft. And that was for a tour that was going to happen a few months later, which did take place. And the band was Ornette, Billy Higgins, Charlie Hayden, and Konitz.
Wow, man, are you kidding?
And it's 12 compositions that Ornette wrote for this band. And they only did one tour in 98, in the summer of 98. So I have that tape, and I transcribed all the music, and it's been used. I've been using that as a launching pad for this new project. And so the core of the project is bassist Chris Tordini and Eric McPherson. And then I complement it, depending on the context, with other people. So we've played a lot with Leo Genovese. We toured with David Virelis.
Oh, beautiful.
Joel Ross has done a few gigs. And I just recorded 2 days ago. I finished. It was a long process over 2 sessions, and I had a bunch of guests. It's a double album that's going to come out on Intact. The same guys. Wow.
Beautiful, man. Wow.
And it's the trio plus David, Leo, Joel, Russ, Shane, Adam O'Farrell is going to do something. Ambrose Akinmusiri is going to do one tune. I haven't finished with Ambrose yet. Gregoire Marais, the harmonica player,
Yeah.
played on one cut,
Oh,
and but the trio stays, and it's we're trying to do. My idea artistically was to do the same thing as Ornette did with Prime Time. You know, this record in all languages.
sure, I love it. Yeah,
So you know, I
yeah,
love that record.
yeah. It's amazing. Yeah.
Actually, it was my first Ornette record. I remember
Ah,
buying
really?
that.
Oh, wow.
What
Okay.
the fuck is this? That's crazy.
Yeah.
And I love that, you know. So it's one side will be acoustic, the other side is all machine, not all machines. It's very arranged. Like I actually did arrange them, but it's a lot of electronics. It's a lot of things that I've been working on for a while. I have you know, I mean, I have a whole side hustle quote of electronic music where I play with pedals and analog synth. It's kind of hidden in Bandcamp, but it's there. So that's the record, and it's a completely different environment. It's a completely different world musically to instigate. There's very little writing for the most part, and it's fun. And I love to be able to play this music with people that really have that, you know. So playing with David is amazing. Leo is crazy, you know. Chris and Emac are beautiful players, and
amazing. Yeah.
it's been just really what I needed now. You know, its life is made of these long cycles, so I'm done with this Indian Uber writing thing. You know, I continue to compose, but in a very set way in different contexts. But now the saxophone, I've been working on. I've changed my setup, changed my mouthpiece, changed everything. So I'm very ready, and I've been ready for this new chapter artistically, and that's the launching pad that we've been using, is this Ornette material.
Oh man, that's so much looking forward to this. I wanted to ask you already about, you mentioned your other secret site, like Silence for the Record. I know that one. I mean, and how did this, I mean, I would never associated this kind of with you when I listened, but like, do you still do that? Do you still investigate that path? And what's your process there and the idea? I mean, how did you fall into that area actually?
I came through it through my genuine love of beats and funk and all the, you know, great Black improvised music heritage. I really like that actually.
Okay.
And I listened to a lot of this. So as far as, I used to have a trio called the Mob Trio with Matt Wilson and this now great friend of mine that had died about 12 years ago called Bob Bowen, the bass player. And I started experimenting then with bringing pedals on the gigs, you know, things that Seamus and Chris Cheek would do, the Bonehead. I've always loved that thing. But then it became a shtick. It became kind of this an empty gesture of sort. And you know, if you do that, you got to go for it. You know, you got to really do it. So in parallel to this, I turned, since 2002, one of my close friends lives in Sao Paulo, and that's a whole situation that I can go into, but I've been going to Brazil once a year, at least.
Really?
Over there. I just came back last week from 3 weeks in Brazil. And over there, I fostered a relationship with this synth maker called Arthur Joly, who's an amazing person who builds his own analog synthesizers. And he custom made one for me, which is just a, you know, a 4 oscillator machine with just, you plug everything. So I've been diving gradually into this thing where it started making sense. That record, Sounds for the Record, is one of the arm of this instigation, which was just this ambient world. Just with, it was just like a challenge. I was like, what can I do? Can I improvise for? I was in that beautiful studio in Porto called Cara. You know, the Orchestra Jazz Matosinhos has this amazing recording place. You probably know that. So I went there and I recorded, and I was like, I only have 3 pedals and a simple looper. But the more substantial thing is something that I've been working on for a little while now, and it's something that I'm finally now trying to plug into my everyday project. So typically, the Ornette thing will have some of this some of these ideas. And you know,
Okay.
and I look for other people who do that. Virelis, David, who used to live in the building here and is a good friend, he's been dealing with that. And a few months ago, August, he was subbing at the last minute and he did a week at the Vanguard. And he brought his synth with the trio. And I'm telling you, man, it was refreshingly amazing or amazingly refreshing, whichever you want.
Yeah.
It's just he's an he's an
He's a
incredible
monster. Yeah.
musician. But he used the synth in a way that was really great. And the other cat that does that is Leo.
Yeah.
So actually, Leo played synth live with us. You know, he knows that thing, and the way they embed it was really something that I wanted as a bass. I'm going to take it further. I'm going to actually do some manipulations and things like that. But I've been digging in. I think it's necessary, actually. You know, we need to do that. You know, I love to do what Lee. I can play all the things you are all day long, and I love it. I genuinely love it. You know, but that's very appealing, and I think it's, as an artistic path, the need to reinvent oneself or to further oneself is essential, or you just grow stale, and that's very much part of this sense of urgency that I feel I need to go there. This is where it's going. You know, I'm not interested in doing GarageBand on my phone and just doing, you know, beats on the 16-point grids. You know, that's not my thing necessarily, but you need to acknowledge that stuff.
Yeah,
you know?
sure.
It's there. It's there.
Yeah, sure.
So, yeah.
Oh, beautiful. I'm looking forward to this new stuff. Yeah, I mean, when is the record coming out, by the way?
October.
October. Are you guys coming to Europe then? Also with
we are.
Any plans?
The first gig is September. I'm gonna tell you. The first gig, I just got some email from the dude. It's we're starting the tour on September 29th in Austria.
Oh, where are you? Shit.
Leibniz.
Are you serious? Okay, that's like 20 minutes away from me. Oh shit, I'll write this down.
You know what's the name of that festival?
Oh, Leibniz, Otmar, Leibniz Jazz Festival.
Yeah, that's what it is. The 29th. Oh, come over.
Yeah.
That's quartet with Chris, Emac, and Joel.
Ooh, okay, shit. Oh man, okay, I'm writing this down. Shouldn't miss that. Wow, that's so cool. Yeah, that's like 20 minutes away from where I live. So.
Oh man, there we go.
Yeah, wow, that's beautiful.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to meeting you in the flesh.
Yeah, we'll have a beer together. So
yeah.
Cool. So it's going to be a busy year this year. You know, not to take more of your time. Like, I guess the new record and this tour. What else do you have still planned? I mean, it seems like you're incredibly busy coming from Brazil and.
I'm doing. So you asked me about the electronics. One of the things I started investigating is just electronics. So I bring my saxophone, the pedals, and I have a minimal set that I have here with analog synth. And I've started collaborating with the Hochschule in Zurich, the dance department.
Oh, wow.
I teach a class on improvisation for dancers.
Wow.
And one thing led to another. And now two of the people that are involved there are great choreographers and good friends of mine. Have commissioned me to write a ballet for the Kosovo National Ballet Theater.
Wow,
and
that's crazy.
That's all machines and me playing things. I'm hiring a couple of people, like, you know, I've collaborated with this cello player called Marielle Roberts. She's a great improviser on cello. Couple string players, but other than that, I'm basically dealing with that universe, you know.
Wow.
So I'm writing. That's this summer. I need to take this summer to write that.
Wow. Fantastic.
Yeah, I mean,
beautiful, man. Okay, looking forward to all this new stuff, man. So
yeah, me too.
to see you in September. So I mean, yeah, cool. Yeah, great. Ohad. You know, I will leave you a nice what is today, Sunday afternoon. So
yeah, it's late. I mean, I appreciate you taking the time. So we'll for sure, you know.
Oh man, I already wrote down the date. If nothing comes up, you know, then definitely I'm there.
Let me give you my phone so you have, because I don't know.
Oh, please, yeah.
I'm just sending in the chat.
Right.
So that's also WhatsApp.
Fantastic. Ooh, I'm looking forward to hear that.
Dr. Jazz.